Hi. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm honored to be able to interview Bo Caldwell. And we're going to be speaking primarily about her novel, City of Tranquil Light, which is about Mennonite missionaries in China at the beginning of the 20th century. So my first question is about the title of the novel. I love novels that are named after places. It's great to have a novel named after a person, but I love that it's named after a place, City of Tranquil Light. So I wonder if you could talk to us about the process of choosing that title.
I will, absolutely. The novel is based on the life of my maternal grandparents. And when I was writing it, I came across this hymn. I was looking through they were Mennonite. I was looking through an old Mennonite hymn book that I'd bought, that I'd found online. And there was a hymn in it called "A Love That Will Not Let Me Go." And I didn't know it, I hadn't heard of it, but I loved that phrase. And I used that for a title, a working title. And I had lunch with my mom one day, and I told her I was thinking about that title. And she just kind of melted, and she said, "Oh, that was Dad's favorite hymn." And I hadn't known that, and so I thought, okay, that's a good sign, that's nice. When I finished the book and got an agent for the book, this really nice young man who's left agenthood and now teaches high school or something, he read the book and he really liked it and he was ready to sell it, and he said, and he was very sweet, but then he said, "You have to get a new title." And I understood that, "Oh, Love That Will Not Let Me Go" is too complicated, and you have to think about it too much, and it's not easy. And so he was the one who suggested, what about, I didn't have this title in it yet, this name of the city. The Chinese is something like Guangping Chung, and that means City of Tranquil Light. So he suggested a place, and then I made up that with the help of a Chinese-American friend. I made up that city, and then we went from there. So I'd love to take more credit for it, but that's it.
It's so interesting that you made up the city. So I was wondering that so many of the names have these allegorical connotations, and also the names of the places. So as I was reading them, I know that you based this loosely on your grandfather's memoir. I was wondering, did she make up the name of that character, or was it in the memoir? Is it a little bit of both?
No, all the names are made up. The name and the missionary's last name is Keen, which is my mom's maiden name. But other than that, all the names are made up. And as I said, I have this wonderful Chinese-American friend who I worked with more than 30 years ago when I was out of college and I was hired by IBM as a technical writer. He was hired at the same time as a programmer, and we were good friends for a few years, and then we kind of parted ways as far as work. And I didn't see him for a long time, and he came up to me at a reading about 5 or 6 years ago, and we restarted our friendship just where we left off. And I mentioned him at the acknowledgments because he was a tremendous help. And so he kind of taught me what the names were like. And then I kind of ran with it. And he kind of looked over them and gave me suggestions, but I kind of got the idea. In this time and place, the Chinese liked names that kind of bode well, that they liked the idea of it. And so like a town that just smelled of horrible water might be City of Sweet Water. Kind of very hopeful names, yes. Even against fact.
And then there was a little bit of even ironic humor in some of those names for me, that the name was the opposite of what the place was actually like, or maybe the person.
Right.
Okay, so on the topic of humor, there's a woman character named Catherine in the novel, and she goes as a nurse to China, and then she marries the protagonist, and she has a kind of self-deprecating humor that I enjoyed very much, and especially in a scene about foot binding. And foot binding is such a serious topic, and yet there was some humor around it. So I wonder if I could read a little bit of that scene, and then we could talk about it. Okay, so the Chinese women come to her as an American, and they want to see her large feet. They're fascinated that a woman would have such large feet. And she says, "I felt my pride quicken. My feet," I wanted to say, "my feet. Do you think I've traveled halfway around the world to show you my feet? But something inside me said, show them your feet." And I understood these women all had bound feet. Seeing a woman with feet as large as mine was an event. Somehow I held my tongue. I'm given many opportunities to do so. And I said, "It's true, my feet are quite large. I looked down and raised my skirt high enough to display my ankles, exposing heavy old size 5 walking boots, which were 2 or 3 times bigger than the tiny embroidered shoes worn by my guests. The women gasped and began talking all at once, marveling and commenting freely on the size and ungainliness of my feet. Then I said, "Would you like to examine them more closely?" The women glanced at each other excitedly, as if this were too good to be true. And then she kind of lies on her back and puts her feet up in the air, lets them examine them. It's so such a fun scene. So I wonder if you could talk about Catherine's sense of humor, and is that something that you think helps her get through other parts of the missionary experience that are difficult?
Well, Catherine is very real in the sense that she's very down, I think she's very down to earth. And one of the things that I chose to do was that I went kind of against type. And so Will, the husband, is the calmer, kind of more slow and steady. He's more cautious, those kinds of qualities, and which was true of my grandparents. And I didn't know that as much as I learned later from my mom. But I chose for Will to be that, and for Catherine to be the kind of go-getter, the more impatient one. She has that missionary zeal. She wants to get things done and help people, which is actually very much like my daughter. I have a daughter who's 30 years old, first year of residency, and she adopted 3 children in the last year. And I learned with Kate to just get out of her way, and we would all be happier. And so I took that for Catherine, and I thought that was more interesting to have this young, she's 5 feet or 5'2", and there's just really sometimes no arguing with Catherine. So she's real, she's outspoken, and so part of the book is told by her through her journal entries that she was keeping at the time. So she's very frank. She's writing a journal. So she can say when she's angry, frustrated, and I'm glad to hear that she's funny. I mean, it's often funny when people are outspoken and say the things that they're thinking that maybe or maybe not they shouldn't say, but yeah.
Refreshingly honest. That's what I took delight, and humor, and even. I love the dialogic structure of the novel. So we have our protagonist, Will, who's writing in first person, and then interspersed with that are Catherine's journal entries. So you see them falling in love in these separate voices, and then they marry, and it continues in the 2 voices. So I enjoyed that dialogic structure. So as a writer, I wondered how you came to that structure. Why did you decide? Was it always going to be in 2 voices?
No, that was later coming, and if you are interested in writing, if you're a writer and want to kind of go down that path, I want to tell you that it's a wonderful process, because you start with, a first draft is kind of raw material, and I think of it very much as a house being built, and it's 2x4s and drywall. And it's okay if you don't like it very much, or if it doesn't look very pretty to you or sound very good, because as you go along, you fix it up and it just gets better and better looking and sounding and all that. And so with this, the book was originally all from Will's point of view, and I struggled with that, by the way. I tried it in third person, first person. I went back and forth a few times. I don't think I tried present tense, but I really struggled with the voice. So I got Will down, and I showed it to that agent and a couple of first readers, and they said that there was not enough Catherine in the story. So it was pretty late in the game. They said, you need more Catherine, and I think I thought of the journal idea came to me, and I loved it. I loved letting her, because she was kind of cloudy. You never heard from her other than dialogue or Will saying what she said. So I just started in writing her journal entries or her diary, just to get her voice down. And it opened up all kinds of doors, because she can tell things that Will doesn't know at the time. And it's very a bittersweet experience to read, to see letters that someone wrote long ago, especially if they're not on this earth anymore. And so it had that advantage as well.
The relationship between them was very real to me as I was reading, and his love for her, especially towards the end of the novel when her health is failing. So I wondered if this novel is partly about God's love for us, that original title that you mentioned, and how we experience that through human relationships in our lives, in their marriage relationship and also the relationship with the community that they're serving.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I think that the novel is partly about marriage, about these two people who fall in love at a young age and live out their lives together. And kind of a side point, but it's important to me, one of the things it's about, I think, is that Will and Catherine, their lives in China are so different than they expect. There's a paragraph early on where Will says, I expected to be preaching to large groups of people, and I pictured this and this and this, and instead it was this and this and this, and he wouldn't trade a thing. And God is so much like that to me. My life is so different than I expected, and that I actually would have chosen in some ways. I wouldn't have chosen some things. In the last 30 years, I've had a divorce, and I had breast cancer 10 years ago, and I came to terms with my alcoholism. And that daughter adopted those children, which was terrifying. I have a son who's gay and who I love more than life. And I wouldn't have checked these off on the list of things, here's what I want. And I'm so eternally grateful, and just kind of, I can get weepy about it at how much I love my life right now. One of the definitions of grace is unmerited favor. And I just feel like it's been, like gifts are heaped upon me. And so I hoped that was one of the things that Will and Catherine experienced, was the unexpected, unanticipated gifts in strange wrappings that they wouldn't trade for anything.
I like the part when they're coming back to America after having been in China, and their clothes are so old and worn down because they've been living in such poverty. And again, with her humor, she says, look at us, the king and queen of the mission field. And she's just laughing with joy because she realizes that their blessings were not material. Yeah, and he almost thinks she's losing it. He's worried because she's laughing. So, and then he understands and laughs as well. That's good. Okay, so when they come back to America, they go through a sort of reverse culture shock that's very powerful. So their identities become Chinese and rooted in this place, the city of Tranquil Light. And the first time they go through culture shock and go back to China, it's such a relief for them to be back. And then the second time, there's a man in a Chinese church who speaks from a Buddhist perspective to Will, and he thinks, yes, the wisdom of that Buddhist perspective. So I wonder if you could talk briefly about the interactions between the cultures in the novel and how they go thinking that they're going to teach and in some pride, and then they end up learning a lot from the people around them.
I was nervous about writing about missionaries because I think missionaries in our culture get a bad rap. In fiction, in movies, in various things. When a missionary enters the stage, a lot of times they're going to be set up for ridicule, or they're greedy, or they're manipulative or exploitative. And there are good and bad missionaries, just like there are lawyers, mothers, fathers, everything. And I wanted to tell the story of these people who really did give themselves to these people. And they had, I don't know if they had it at the start, but they were given humility, which comes at a cost sometimes. But they learned that to be open. I think over and over again, Will and Catherine are open. They come home, and in some ways they feel like leaving China is the end for them, but they are open enough that they have a whole nother chapter in their lives. And so I hope, I really wanted to give them that, and as I said, I think it was kind of hard won for them, but I think when they're open, they can keep
receiving as well as giving, right through to the end. So they receive from the community in China, and then from a Chinese American church in the Los Angeles area towards the end of the book. Okay, so one other cultural question I have is, did you travel to China while working on the book, or were you reading books about Chinese geography and culture?
I've never been to China. My first novel also takes place in China, from Shanghai and Los Angeles, 1937 to 1961. So I'd kind of struggled with that question before of, do I need to go? And this time, the city I was writing about, or the area in China from 1906 to 1930-ish, 1927, I think, has changed. It's been 100 years now, but the change is like 200 years in some ways. And I didn't feel like it would help me that much to go back. And in fact, I felt like seeing the modern place might actually hinder me as a writer, that I needed to, I wanted my own city and my own landscape, and I did do a lot of research for it. Sometimes this much of it appears, but I know this much.
The Gothic novelist Anne Radcliffe read travel narratives of France and Italy and then set her Gothic novels in those locations and did a very good job of describing the landscapes. So there's a tradition of that. That was another question I had connected to the title being a place. Could you describe your process of using words to construct images of architecture, landscape, spaces in your writing? Because I found it almost painterly, and it was very vivid to picture in my mind as I was reading.
Thank you. Well, place is really important to me in my fiction. It's important to me in my heart, and it's important to me in my fiction. I love home, and I found that places take up places in my heart and never go away. So I grew up in San Marino, and when I fly down here or drive down here, a part of me says, oh, I'm home, though I haven't lived here since I was 18, long term. My daughter's in Oklahoma City now, and that's where I was born and where my dad's family lived, and I can drive by the house where my dad grew up. And part of me says, this is home. I see that red dirt. So this book, this is about people leaving home, and especially for Will, a home that he loves, that he doesn't really want to leave, but he answers God's call. And then they work hard, and this unexpected thing happens that China becomes home. And so as I describe all that, it has to be very vivid, and it might start out for me kind of vague. I had to learn about that landscape and that city. The city is fictional. It's my city. I made it up based on fact and based on other descriptions, but there's a city wall that I describe a little bit, and various things. So, I have to. It's really important to me, and so I have to picture it first, and then I have to keep working at it until I think you can picture it too. And the old writer's rule is significant, concrete detail. It has to be both of those. It can't be just significant detail. It has to be also concrete, and vice versa.
Okay. The bandit chief. So there's a character, a bandit chief, and he's a lovable bandit chief. I found myself very drawn to him from the beginning, even though he's doing things that are quite devious, and part of it are the details of his description. So he steals various things and uses them for clothing, like a woman's bra. He has a woman's bra tied around his waist, and he puts his money in that. And so there's some comic effect there as well. So could you describe the creation of the bandit chief? Was he based on a real person in the memoir at all, or?
No, definitely not in my grandfather's memoir. He was somewhat based on research. As a novelist, you get to be God. You want a tree there, and you say there was a large oak tree in the courtyard, and there it is. So the bandit chief, as I was doing research, bandits were a very real threat in China at that time, and something that people thought about all the time, and they were very present. And so as I was doing my research and I learned that, I thought, well, I definitely want a bandit chief in the novel. So he was there. But I made him, again, kind of going against type, like I did with Will and Catherine. I made the bandit chief small, and he has kind of fine, beautiful hands and fine features, and he has a smile, and he, against kind of a thug. I didn't make him a thug. And so as soon as, I find that as soon as my characters start to become specific, I start kind of falling in love with them. I start to really like them and to know them. So the bandit chief grew, and I wrote this scene with him wearing all these things when he kidnaps Will. And then he took on a life of his own. He was one of the joys of this novel for me. He took on a life of his own and reappeared many times and was very important in the novel, in plot and in every other way. And I was very glad I got to know him. I miss him a little bit.
Yeah, he's paradoxically a vehicle of grace love and sustenance to Will, which prepares the reader for what will happen with him. I don't want to give that away in case people are going to read the novel. But he, for me, is a figure of hope. Okay, so I thought hope is a theme in this novel because they're going through many hardships. They lose a child at one point, and I've been thinking about Emily Dickinson. She has this quote, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the song without the words and never stops at all. And this is partly a novel about perseverance, though they're on the edge of losing hope a couple times. So could you talk a little bit about the theme of hope in the novel?
Sure. I read in a devotional that sometimes we wait for hope. We don't feel hope, but we can trust that hope will come. And that kind of backed it up for me, so that it was okay if I didn't feel hopeful that day. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but that sometimes faith means waiting and believing that you will feel better and that you will feel more optimistic or more hopeful. Also, as I wrote the novel, I knew that it was about these people who go to this faraway place, they come home, and then I knew from the start that, this is in the first few pages, so I'm not giving anything away, that Will outlives Catherine. So he's going to be facing the death of his beloved wife. And as I came to that part, I thought, wow, I'm really going to do this. I happen to really like my husband. And so as I got to this part, it hit me more than I expected. But I truly felt like I kind of worked through some of this with Will, that he does go on to live another life. You know, I lost my mom a couple years ago, and it's still very fresh, but I know that we don't stay there forever. And so I wanted to write about that, and to show that he continues, and that that he does come upon hope.
I forgot that he is talking of her in the past tense from the beginning of the novel, so you know he's going to lose her. And I forgot that we know that from the beginning, and I didn't want to give away that. But now that you've mentioned that, I want to read just one more part from page 265, where she's writing in her journal. And she, towards the end, she knows her health is failing, and she writes, "Last night I could not fall asleep." And then she says, "After a few minutes, you said, 'Catherine, is something troubling you?' I said, 'No, because I was embarrassed. I couldn't explain why I was afraid.' You said, 'Are you sure? I told you my secret.' I said, 'I'm afraid.' You sat up and switched on the light and turned towards me and took my hand. I thought you would tell me there was nothing to be afraid of. But instead you said, 'We never know what we will be afraid of, do we?' And you kissed the back of my hand. You said, 'We could rest in another room,' and you took an extra quilt from the closet, and we went into the living room, and you let me curl up next to you on our sofa, and I fell asleep and slept through the night. I dreamed of a river with beautiful, clear running water and big shade trees on both sides and air that smelled of narcissus." And that makes me think of the river in the book of Revelation, the river, and it has a tree on either side in the New Jerusalem. So she's kind of dreaming of heaven. But that's the moment where I thought, oh, her husband is a vehicle of God's love for her there towards the end of her life, and that the novel is about missions and intercultural exchange, but very much about love, as its initial title indicated. And the novel is full of biblical allusions, like even there with the river and the tree on either side, a biblical allusion, but they're very subtle. Could you say something about these biblical allusions? They come out just once in a while through the narrative.
Well, one thing that struck me when I was doing my research, and I read my grandfather had written a memoir about their lives in China for our family. And so I reread that many times, and then I read lots of other biographies and autobiographies of missionaries. And one of the things that struck me is that it was very New Testament, and the phrases they used, people heard of us far and wide, people came to us far and wide for healing, and we went from one town to another. And they were curing people, not in the order of miracles, but they were giving them medical care, and so it appeared like that. And so I just, there, it was very primitive, and the similarities struck me. And so I may have been aware of it that way, but I really tried to be in Will's mind, and he had such a commitment to God that I hope I'm guessing it kind of came through that way. It was not completely intentional.
That's it. It feels like he's saturated with scripture, and so it just comes out naturally in his speech once in a while, so it doesn't feel forced at all. It's a good model for Christian writers thinking about how to bring their faith in naturally into their writing. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I guess, are you willing to?
I think we have
to. Okay. I know. I try to figure out. Are you willing to talk a little bit about your own faith journey and how working on this novel kind of spoke to that? Even when you were talking about the hope to persevere, I thought that's like writing a book and believing you're going to finish even when you have those moments where you think you're not. And then with their mission work, they're believing there's a purpose even when they can't see it, that God can see the big picture.
Well, the book was about surrender to me in many ways. As I mentioned breast cancer earlier, and I was diagnosed over 9 years ago, and I had written about 80 pages of the book. And I went through chemo and radiation. I'm healthy today and very grateful. But I really gave it up in that period. I just felt like, I don't know if God wants me to be writing this book. I don't know if he wants me to be writing it all. And so when I came back to it, it was with more certainty that this is what I needed to be doing. And so I learned a lot about faith and surrender, and I hope that was very much part of their experience as well.
So that's a theme in the book,
right.
Because you were going through that. I can see that. And sometimes when we turn the thing over to God, he makes something of it that we hadn't expected and is even better than what we had initially planned. I think that's really...
Right.
That's really true. So if you're stuck, it could be just that God is up to something and you can't see it yet.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Okay, so now we'll have a reading from Bo Caldwell from her novel.
This is about a scene with that bandit chief that Natasha mentioned. It's it's kind of 2/3 of the way through the book. The bandit chief captured Will early on, and Will didn't think he'd ever see him again, but he has continued to be a force in his life. At this point, the bandit chief has been captured because he raided the city, and it was a revengeful thing to do because the city had captured and killed the bandit chief's son, who had done bad things too. Will, the bandit chief has hurt Will, but somehow Will still feels affection and even love for him. And he goes to visit him in this horrible prison. The bandit chief has been beaten up, and he's probably going to be tortured for his actions. And so Will has pled with the magistrate that he just be allowed to die, that there be no torture. And so this is when Will goes to see the bandit chief. It's 1921 in the interior of China. Behind the gate was a small enclosure that was like a wooden cage. I saw nothing there at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw a bent-over form in the corner. As I moved forward, I saw it was indeed Xiao Lao, the bandit, though so changed I am not sure how I recognized him. He cowered as I came near, and I said, "Xiao Lao, it is Mushi." That is pastor, the shepherd teacher in Chinese. He did not move. I knelt next to him, and he turned toward me, and as my eyes adjusted and I was able to look at him, I was shocked by what I saw. Without meaning to, I asked, "What have they done?" He looked far worse than he had when the magistrate's guards had taken charge of him the day before. His face was bruised and bloody and raw, his eyes nearly swollen shut. He had been stripped of his gray scholar's gown, and the shoes he had worn and was now clothed only in a pair of ragged trousers. He shivered from the cold and shock and pain. He was filthy, his hair matted and caked with blood, and when I reached out to touch him, he shook violently and recoiled from me. "Xiao Lao," I said again, "do not be afraid. I will not hurt you." He turned and squinted at me, and I saw recognition come into his face. I asked the guard for water, then asked again when he did not bring it, and when he finally did appear with a wooden bowl, I took the towel that had patted the bucket of food, watered it, and began to wash Xiao Lao. He pulled away from me at first, but I spoke to him softly and continued, cleaning some of the caked dirt from his face and head and arms and legs as gently as I could. By the time I began to bathe his feet, the towel was as filthy as the bandit chief's trousers, but I continued. I had brought ointment and bandages with me, and when I had washed him as best as I could, I began dressing his wounds, all the while trying to ignore the anger I felt at what he had endured. Xiao Lao said nothing all this time, but he gradually stopped trembling. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse. "You are my physician once again, Mushi, only this time I am the captive." "It would seem so," I said. The bandit smiled slightly as he watched me pour vegetables and noodles into a bowl. I fed it to him in small bites, and when he had finished it, he lay back and seemed to be in less pain. I said, "I have asked that there be no torture." He shook his head. "The magistrate will not agree to this," he said matter-of-factly. "He will want my punishment to exceed my crimes, as do I, for the crime of raising a shameful son." "The magistrate has agreed to wait 1 day," I said. I paused, trying to think how to phrase the rest of it, but Xiao Lao did it for me. He said, "I suspect my spirit will leave for the other side during the night." I said, "If God wills it." He said, "And perhaps I will meet your God." He swallowed with difficulty and closed his eyes. "I believe he will judge me harshly, Mushi, but I am not afraid." "You are his beloved son," I answered, "and he is a great mystery, far beyond my knowing. He does not abandon what he has lovingly created, and what happens next is up to him. I will pray for you." Xiao Lao looked at me. "Why would you pray for me, Mushi? I have read of your God and what you gave me, and I have learned a good deal about him. I have come to know that I am a sinful man, whereas you are a man of great faith. You have honored me by being my friend, and this mystifies me." He smiled weakly. "He is a foolish God, Mushi, to ask you to treat your enemies this way. Your God does not behave in the way I would expect." I laughed suddenly, for I had thought the same many times. How foolish God is with me, my sweet, spendthrift, profligate Lord, bestowing on me more gifts than I can number, and certainly more than I deserve, believing in me more than makes sense, asking of me things I would not have thought myself capable of. It may seem that way, Xiao Lao. He is foolish in his giving and his care for us. He has spoiled me throughout my life. "I saw this same foolishness in you when I forced you to treat my men," he said. "I did not expect you to help them. I thought at first you might try to kill them. Then I saw you were not devious enough. But as I watched, I saw your kindness to them. I do not understand this." I said, "They were hurt and in pain. I have learned to do what God places in front of me, whatever that is." "Were you not angry? They had stolen from you." "As had you," I said, "but I asked God to help me not to act on my anger and to concentrate on the work at hand instead." Xiao Lao nodded. "This is an enlightened view, Mushi, foolish but enlightened." "My friend, do you not find that the foolish and the enlightened are often one and the same?" The bandit chief smiled slightly, then became so still that I thought he had lost consciousness from his beatings. Finally, he opened his eyes. "Mushi, since I met you, I have had moments when this God of yours has seemed very real to me, times when I have felt that someone I cannot see is very near. He seems so now. I sense him in this place with us, and while I should be consumed by fear, I am not. I cannot explain this." I was caught by surprise both at Xiao Lao's admission and at the truth of it, for God did seem very present in that wretched cell. "He does not ask us to understand him, only to trust him," I said. "I find myself in a place I do not know. Certainty has always been my companion, but now I cannot say that I truly believe, nor can I say what you teach is false." "Faith is a gift," I said. "All we can do is be open to it. The rest is up to the giver of that gift, and it is never too late to receive it." Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.